That's a Texan waiting on his future wife.
Welcome to Stories of Brisco and Bradshaw. I would be Bradshaw, and that would be your Chickashaw native, your Chickashaw Hall of Famer, Oklahoma's favorite son, Mr. Gerald Brisco. And we have got also with us the wrestling's greatest historian, our favorite historian, Mr. Tony Richards. And we're going to talk with one of the greatest families in wrestling history, one of the greatest territories in wrestling history. It is the Gulas family, and it is Mr. George Gulas. George, welcome to the show.
Glad to be on your show. It's an honor, and I respect all of y'all. And to put me on the show, I couldn't ask for anything better to start the Tuesday off.
Wow.
Well, George, man, we really appreciate that, and man, we apologize to everybody. We kind of wanted you last week, but we had some technical difficulties. That wasn't my fault, Layfield.
That's the only mistake for the year. That's enough.
Yeah. Okay, but anyway, we got
we do 50. We do over 50 shows a year, George.
Well, yeah, one out of 50 being bad, I'd take that any day. That's like shooting 10 baskets and making 9. I'll take that.
That's pretty
good.
You're
a referee and an umpire. Well, our average would be pretty damn high then, right?
Well, it just depends what games you got, who you're refereeing, what teams are playing. That all adds up because we always talk before the game what kind of refereeing and officiating we're going to do, because you look at the teams, because how they play is how you officiate.
George, you've been doing this for quite a while. How long have you been refereeing umpiring? I mean, that's one of the things we waited on you. We understand your passion for it because, we all enjoy sports, but you're out there actually participating in them. And how long have you been doing your umpiring and refereeing?
I've been refereeing and umpiring for 46 years. And the funny thing about it is I went to a small town near Nashville to referee. It was girls' high school basketball. And before the game started, one of the players came over and says, "Did you ever referee my mother?" And I said, "Yeah." "Well, my mother's 57 years old now." And I said, "Well, 40-some odd years ago, she was your age." "That's amazing to referee my mother." Of course, the mother came over and 2 or 3 more. And it's funny to referee players now, and their mothers are mid to late 50s, and I referee them.
Yeah, that's the thing, and I get Layfield all the time because he gets that, he has these nice looking young ladies come up to him. My mother had a crush on you. Well, it was me, and my grandmother had a crush on you. And holy cow, man, that sucks. But George, welcome to us, man. We're anxious to get into the Gulas family, the Gulas dynasty, and that Mid-South wrestling and Gulf Coast wrestling and everything. Of course, we got our local expert there, Tony Richards, that did a fantastic 10-part series on it. Now we can stretch it and say it's 11-part series on this. But man, we're anxious to get into it to just start us off a little bit. Your father was really a polarizing figure in the professional wrestling. A lot of people loved your dad. A lot of people, wasn't so crazy about your dad's payoffs and everything. How did you feel about that growing up? Were you ever involved in that? And when did you know that your father was this such an outstanding man in the community there?
I guess probably when I was about 8, 9, 10 years old, I started realizing, because when you're young, you don't think about it. And then when I got old, especially in middle school, it really rang a bell saying, you know what? My dad is doing something here that I guess he wanted to do when he first started this, to come to Nashville from Birmingham and to live around and be around what he's done and what he said. And I guess wrestlers have wrestled here in the past, all back in the day. It was an honor to see all those wrestlers here. And then, of course, they went on to bigger and better things. And, of course, also my dad had started a lot of wrestlers also. But, you're going to get the good and the bad comments. That's in anything, even refereeing basketball. You're going to get the good and bad comments by coaches and players or whatever. But I guess sometimes when nobody talks about you, it's not good. So good or bad, you're going to hear it. But you just have to swallow the bad and just keep going. And it's going to happen. And after we're gone, it's going to happen to others too.
Yeah. And at what age did you start watching wrestling and feeling, oh man, this is cool?
Probably fourth or fifth grade.
Yeah.
That's exactly when I started. Like my dad had, television wrestling way back in the late 50s and 60s, and it was at WSIX Channel 8. Now it's Channel 2. And he had wrestling back then. And that's when I really started watching, because it would be late at night, 10 o'clock at night. And I would stay up to watch it. And my grandmother would always be there watching it with me. And we would watch it and it'd be 10 o'clock. And it was every Saturday. And it was at Channel 8. Now it's Channel 2. And that's what really brought me in the front of watching wrestling, probably fourth or fifth grade, when I really understood what was going on, instead of the first few years after I started elementary school.
Yeah, your dad and Roy Welch, they kind of started the company in Nashville, and they drew some amazing crowds to the Hippodrome without television. Before television ever started, we went through that national time where a lot of wrestling came from Chicago and it came from Dallas. But, Roy and Nick really pioneered the local television wrestling show in your local town, and Nashville was a big part of that. What's your earliest memories of that early television time when you were a kid?
Well, I used to go sometimes to the wrestling match in Nashville at Channel 8. And the first thing that came to my mind was the interviews. Gil Green was the announcer and commentator, along with Smiling Jack Simpson.
Right.
And what really caught my attention, when they interviewed the wrestlers back in those days, they'll have pictures on a big cardboard and had on an easel. And they'd go through and say the first match is so-and-so versus so-and-so. Then to bring the wrestlers out to interview. And to see that, it was amazing to see them come out to be interviewed, but to see the pictures on the board first, then they take one board away and they show the other board and who was wrestling. So little things like that stood in my mind. And also the theme song they had played over and over, that stayed in my mind. Matter of fact, one of the local wrestlers here wanted to know what's the name of it. And I had to go back in the archives to get it. So these are people now that still like to see the old wrestling, but there's nothing left of those old tapes, because back then they just had the wrestling match and that was it. Of course, when it got later on, they always taped and there were bicycle tapes around. But the early days, never anything was there. But I wish it was, because that'd be worth a fortune now.
Yeah, they were just focused on the live show, right?
Right.
Every single week. And I'm glad you brought up Gil Green and Jack Simpson, because in one of our episodes, we told the story about Gil Green and how he unfortunately killed himself and committed suicide. Do you have many memories of Gil?
Yes. And I don't know if you know the story why he did commit suicide. And I can just briefly tell you, my dad told me why it happened. And Gil was a great announcer, probably one of the best commentators around. And one day, the station manager told Gil, this was on a Friday, said, "Gil, I want you to come in on Monday. I need to talk to you." And of course, Gil started panicking, and he was going supposedly to a circus like that same week. And that weekend, he told one of the cameramen, said, "I'm not going to be around next week. Why don't you just take these 2 tickets to the circus?" And I guess he probably figured, well, he's going to be out of town or whatever. And of course, that Monday before it happened, he took his life. Mm-hmm. And the reason why, he had told somebody, "I'm sure they're going to tell me today they're going to fire me from the TV station." Mm. He thought of something worse, but no, they will give him a higher up and a raise and have more responsibility. But Gil was that way. He thought when he heard the manager say, "I want to talk to you," the first thing came to his mind was something bad.
Yeah, he was.
And if he had known what it was beforehand, he'd still been there years later. But to give those tickets away that weekend, he had it all planned.
He was a very young, good-looking fella, and I guess just real insecure.
Right. All the women liked him, and my dad and him were very close. My dad took it hard when what he done, and like I said, to take your own life on something that wasn't going to happen, wow. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, that is an unbelievable story, George, that he took his life on a mistake.
On a mistake, because he thought the station manager was going to say, "Well, Gil, we're going to have to let you go." And it wasn't that. It was that he was going to give him a raise and more responsibilities and more to do at the station. And that's why that weekend he went and said to the cameraman, take these tickets. I'm not going to be here. And that was the next weekend. And nobody thought anything like that. And then Monday was when they done it.
Wow. Well, we talked about, his wife came home and found him. He drank weed killer or something like that. That's how he passed away. And I'm glad you filled in that.
That's got to be a brutal way of taking your life.
It's terrible.
Well, it burns all your insides. I mean, your organs just burn to nothing.
Yeah.
I'm glad you filled in the blanks on that. That's awesome. Thank you for.
It's a shame, but like I said, you never know when somebody says, I want to talk to you, especially the higher up, and he took it wrong, and it was unfortunate he done.
One of the things that I really wanted to get across in the series that we did was how important Nashville was, because in some ways I kind of think Nashville's lost its reputation as a premier wrestling city. But back in those days, I mean, everything pretty much revolved around Nashville, right?
Yeah, and it's a shame that the place they had wrestling for years, the Hippodrome, but they actually tore it down. It's just like the Ryman. And they renovated that and built that back up. I wish they had kept the Hippodrome. It was a unique building. It was skating during the week and wrestling on Tuesday nights. They had concerts there like Chuck Berry and all would come in there. Even Vanderbilt played a lot of basketball games there. Of course, right across the street from Vanderbilt. And I'd say it was the mecca of wrestling because it was the start of wrestling in Nashville. It was a nice building, held about 2,000 or 3,000. And every Tuesday night was wrestling there for years. And it had a nice marquee at the front. They had lights that would flash around and say Hippodrome and spell it out. It's right across the street from Centennial Park. And so many wrestlers came in and out of that building for years. And spectators today, the older ones, still say, I remember the Hippodrome. And of course, they tore it down. And at the place now is the Holiday Inn that they built right across from Vanderbilt. And like I said, it was a building that should never been torn down. And I'll never forget the Hippodrome. And people that have gone there or wrestlers, they'll never forget the Hippodrome because it was a unique place for pro wrestling.
Well,
Nashville's a city that, like a lot of other cities and major territories, your wrestling was there every week. It was weekly. Talent there every week. And you had no other sport, so wrestling was really the main attraction to the city. I mean, Nashville, of course, with the country music, but wrestling, as far as sporting events go, wrestling was it. There was no football, there were no Titans, there were no baseball, no basketball or anything like that. Well, did a lot of wrestlers live in the Nashville area too?
I'd say about 85%. Some lived around 20, 25 miles away, like Murfreesboro. Some lived in Clarksville, but the majority lived in Nashville. Some at trailer parks,
Memphis usually gets the credit for where all the wrestlers have. But I always wondered, Nashville's such a nice city too. If a lot of guys live there.
Well, Nashville was geographically located where, as your dad and Roy built the territory and expanded it, Nashville was still the center. I mean, all the major towns were no more than 300 miles away.
Exactly right. Nashville was the locality of, this is the spot we're going to have wrestling leave here, and where we go, it's not going to be more than 250, 300 miles. So Nashville was the backbone of all the other cities that was connected to Nashville.
Why do you think Memphis slowly got the honor of being, the head of that territory down there?
Well, like I said, sometimes you have to face things, and Nashville drew because of what, like you said in the past, there was nothing there. No baseball, no football, no hockey, anything. And then when others took it, it built up from where it started. And I think my dad and Roy, whatever they started in Nashville, but anybody else came to get that, it was because of them. If it wasn't for my dad and Roy, I don't think Nashville ever been that popular or that successful. And like Tony said, it was the backbone of all the other cities, and that's why Nashville became so apparent everywhere that Nashville was a place to go to wrestle back in those days.
I think
like here in Florida, Tampa always took the lead were most of your angles originated in Nashville, or were they originated in Memphis, or what? How did that go down?
Nashville.
Nashville.
Yeah, I
Right
think
off TV, because like I said, we had TV wrestling there, so that's where the angles came off from. There was not anything else. And a big thing, my dad was very close to the newspapers, and all the sports writers would write columns, and then the next morning they would put the result of the wrestling match from Tuesday night in Wednesday's paper morning. And we also had two papers there. We had the Tennessean and the Banner. And the Banner was the condensed version of the Tennessean. So in the afternoon, it would be a small paragraph about who won this match and that match. But on the Wednesday morning, it'd be a big column. And they also sometimes put pictures in and put little headlines. So my dad always said, treat the paper right because they'll do you good. You don't treat them right, they could kill you. And
I think
so you're telling me your dad.
Cities.
You're telling me your dad was a lot like Andy Graham, because the newspapers here around here in Tampa, he always gave these golden handshakes to, as Andy Graham called them.
Right. My dad loved ads. He put ads in every week, sometimes 2 a week. And of course, back then it didn't cost like it is now, but it would give him big size ads. I'd say maybe 3 inches by 4 inches, and have the card on there, 2 or 3 pictures, where to buy the tickets in advance. And this went on years and years. It went on all when my dad retired. It went that far with the newspaper. And there's some that don't like the newspaper, but back then we didn't have computers and all this and internet. Even when it came around, my dad still used the paper because they were so good to him. And every sports writer, even some today that's still alive, said Nick treated us good, and we wouldn't treat him back the same way.
I think too, as there is a lot of things in pro wrestling, if you study the whole history of it, you have transitions. And I think most of those shows back then were done live. I mean, I think your dad and Roy had so many live shows in Chattanooga and Birmingham and Nashville and Huntsville, Alabama, and all these different locations that as the transition was happening in the 70s to go to more recorded shows and bicycle tapes, a lot of that was done at the Memphis studio.
Right.
And then as your dad was retiring at the tail end of when the recorded video era was starting, I think so much of what survives today is Memphis based. And that's why I think it gets more credit than the other towns.
And what's so funny, back at the office, we had a room with all those tapes. And back then, these tapes were big, round, real tapes. It wasn't like the small one. Then, of course, they went to the smaller one. But had them all lined up, every city, Birmingham, Nashville, Memphis, Huntsville, Louisville, and they all had their little initials on there. So if they wanted to come in, and Tuesdays is when we done the booking. And it was 5 of us in there. It was Eddie Marlin, Jerry Jarrett, myself, Lynn Ross, and my dad. And we'd sit down on a Tuesday and start around noon, 1 o'clock, may go 4 or 5 hours doing it because there were so many towns they booked. And they would say, okay, let's put this tape from Nashville and Huntsville. And they pulled it out. And Mike Duncan was the one that done all that for us. And they put down Huntsville. It would be into Huntsville TV Saturday. Or the one made in Nashville, we need to send that to Birmingham. And so that's what really got everything started, was the tapes that was bicycled all of them around the different cities. And it would be one angle today in Nashville, 2 weeks later could be in Chattanooga or Birmingham. And of course, they had their live TV too. So it was so much going on. That's why it took so long to put different tapes, different places, because they had their live TV.
You mentioned Mike Duncan. Mike Duncan was a guy who also hosted the Nashville show.
Right.
And was on some of the Nashville syndicated tapes that went around. What's your memories of Mike Duncan?
Mike was a great guy. We were real close. He'd go to Huntsville on Friday nights and do the announcing. And we'd go to Huntsville maybe once or twice a month and actually tape the last match or the semifinal, the last match. We wouldn't tape it all. Sometimes we wouldn't tape the last match at all, because if you do that, people say, why should we go next week? They're going to show it on TV the next day.
Yeah.
So they would tape certain matches to put on TV. And Mike was one of the commentators. And the one that done a lot of the bicycling, the tapes, was Mike Shields. He's the one that done all the filming back then. And those two worked together close. And Mike was a great guy in commentating, and he built everybody up like they're supposed to be. And he was a great person for wrestling.
It's a shame that we don't have any tape of
Nope.
Mike Duncan, because he was a fantastic announcer.
So many people have asked, you have those old tapes from back in the 70s and 80s? I said, no. And it's a shame, because what they'd be worth now would be astronomical. I mean, it would go over so well, everybody would buy those tapes.
I've often wondered about, I'm glad you described the booking meeting, because the size of the territory and the amount of guys that were working for your dad and Roy, which Roy was, by the time you're talking about, Roy was kind of out of the business because
Right.
he was semi-retired or whatever. But I always wondered what the size of that booking book must have been for
the booking
all
book was, it looks like a big scrap book with about 100 pages, and each of the first page, they'd block it off in squares. Like on Monday, would have Birmingham, we'll have Memphis. And if it's a spot show, it'd be Clarksville. And then Tuesday would be Johnson City, Louisville, 2 or 3 spot shows. And then Wednesday would be Nashville, Evansville. Thursday would be Bowling Green and Lexington. Friday would be Knoxville, Huntsville, Tupelo. And then in between, we may have to add 15 more blocks of spot shows.
Well, you got to get Chattanooga in there too.
And Chattanooga would be, usually Chattanooga ran on Thursday, but it started going on Saturday, and Chattanooga drew better on Saturday, except every year Chattanooga drew good on Thanksgiving night.
I mean, John and Jerry and I've talked so many times about what a logistical trick that was to manage all those towns and all those guys and all those schedules and all those television shows and all of that stuff.
And like I said, back then, if Jared came in, he'll say, okay, Nick, here's what we have in Memphis and Louisville. Write that down. And then my dad said, okay, here's what we got in Birmingham, Nashville, and Huntsville. So we worked that way, but there were so many other towns, because my dad said, well, I tell you what, we've got about 15 more cities this week. We got spot shows coming out of our ears. And it was a book that I have it saved, but I can't find it now. But it was a relic. It should be in the archives, because nobody had a book that big and that many towns and what was included in it.
Well, I'm going to get in the car right after this show, and I'm going to drive down there, and I'm going to help you find it.
Yeah, we need to find it, because my dad had a list of 50 wrestlers, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And the easiest way to do it, if you was available and you weren't checked off on Monday, you were available. And so that way it kept everybody. And he may say, well, he needs 3 shots this week. He's only got 2. But if you didn't have that list, you wouldn't know. And that way, if somebody had 5 shots, you know who they were, the ones on top. The ones that filled in, they may have 1, 2, or 3. But the list was every week. It was a new one made. So you knew on Wednesday who was available and not available. Instead of saying, I don't know if he's available or not. This way it was easier.
All without a computer or Excel.
Yeah. George, you mentioned you sitting on a booking meeting. What was the first way that your dad started drawing you into the business? Was it selling tickets, running bicycle tapes to the bus station, or what was your first little job that you had with the wrestling business?
Some commentating, doing interviews, and then he would have special matches with special referee, and it would be special NWA referee, and I would referee wherever they wanted to send me with that.
At what age did he start getting you involved like that?
I'm gonna say probably 17 or 18.
Well, right after Lynn Rossi had his accident, you and he did the Louisville, Kentucky show, didn't you?
It was on Fridays.
Was that a live show?
Yeah, it was live at WDRB in Louisville, and it was a small TV station, but they had WLKY. They also had 2 TV stations there, but we done it at the TV station on Friday. And then what was so bad, when you left Louisville, you could never get to where you were going. You couldn't get to Knoxville. You couldn't get to Huntsville because it's so far. So whoever was on TV, you basically, that's all you done that day, because you couldn't get to the other little towns. It's impossible.
George, when Roy Welch and your dad had one of the biggest by geography territories in the world, they had one of the most powerful territories in the world, and certainly one of the best territories in the world. How was their relationship that when they were together?
Probably one of the best you'd see between two people. They were opposite in personality, and sometimes they would have maybe disagreements. And my dad would walk out, and or Roy would walk out. Hour or two later, they'd come back like nothing ever happened. But they never stayed there to argue. And I think that's what made it so successful. Once you start arguing, you may say something wrong. They'll take it wrong. You'll take it wrong. Before you know it, you're in a heated argument. So I'd say 80% of the time, they agreed with each other because that's what it was so powerful and so successful. They all kind of had the same kind of thought in mind what they were going to do. But there would be some episodes that they didn't agree, but they would never stay around. An hour or two later, they'd be back and nothing ever happened.
You said they were opposite. How were they opposite?
Roy was kind of laid back, didn't say a lot. He didn't talk. My dad was more outgoing. Hey, boy, what are you doing, boy? And Roy was the quiet type. And maybe that's why it was so successful. You heard my dad a block away. You may have heard Roy next room over. So my dad was the spokesman, but Roy would put his 2 cents in and would help the thing better. But my dad was the loud one. I guess we're being Greek. I guess that's why. I don't know.
Yeah. Was Nick also involved in the matchmaking part of it? I mean, the finishing part of it, or was that more of a Roy assignment?
Both
Both
together. Yeah.
So your dad was not only the businessman, but he was also the businessman in the wrestling part of it too.
Right.
Well, they
like
had
I said,
they had different towns, didn't they, George? They had different towns that they took.
Right. And they did back then. They would book the towns, and we got bigger. That's when an office was built in Nashville, and that's when we all got together to book, the 5 of us. But back in those days, there weren't that many towns, so they would book in the office, just those 2 only, and they'd close the door, and maybe a couple hours. It didn't take that long, because most of the wrestling offices back in the day was in hotel lobbies, and they would build a nice office for my dad and Roy. Maxwell House Hotel, Noel Hotel, Sam Davis Hotel, Tulane Hotel. They didn't have offices. They worked out of hotels. And that made it convenient for the wrestlers because they stayed in those places. And they'd come down that next day and pick up their book and know where they were going. So everybody was conveniently in one location. And so that's why then it was only 2 people. My dad had a secretary, and that was about it. And then Christine Jarrett came into the business, and it was 4 of them. And then, of course, after those years, it got bigger, and they had to go somewhere. The hotel lobby and those offices were too small. And that's when they built an office for my dad on Franklin Road. It was a nice office. Today, now it's a Publix. So that's where and we had a ring downstairs in the garage. It's like a big room, maybe 40 feet by 40 feet. A ring was put down there. And so if they wanted to work out, they'd go down and work out. New ones came in. If they wanted to learn, they went down in there. But it was a big office. It was like 8 or 9 rooms. It was a long hallway. And the conference room was about 20 feet by 20 feet. And sometimes we had to have a meeting with wrestlers that all come to the office that particular day. And my dad and Jerry and them would sit and talk to them. They had to talk to all the wrestlers. So the rest office became big, from hotel to then. And then at the very end, when they sold the building, they built a wrestling office at the Fairgrounds Arena. Right next to the arena was an office built for my dad, and it was half the size of the one on Franklin Road, but still it was built just for him. And they would do the booking there, and there was a room half the size of the one used to be on Franklin Road. But to have an office right next to the arena, and Wednesday was the wrestling night, my dad went out the door, walked 20 feet into the arena. So it's convenient for them back then with that arena.
Gosh,
of course, they tore the fairgrounds down. And there's another building that I wish they kept. But, of course, the soccer team moved here, the professional soccer team, and they had to build that. But a lot of people are really disappointed. but the fairgrounds arena was torn down. And above the ring was a ring light and said, this building was built in honor of Nick Gulas. And it's on all four sides of the light. Because my dad always liked a ring light. The lights would go out, the ring light would come on. Hippodrome was a big factor of that. And then the fairgrounds too. No wrestling match was taken or filmed without the ring light only. And that way, he said, it kept the people more involved, because sometimes people wouldn't show the enthusiasm if the lights were on and everybody was seeing them screaming and hollering. So the lights were out, and above the light was the big sign about my dad. So even back then, they said, I wish they'd have kept the fairgrounds arena, because after my dad left, wrestling was there for years after that. And of course, when that torn down, now you can't even believe it's the same fairgrounds, because the soccer really built a big arena there for soccer. It's one of the biggest. Matter of fact, Nashville is the biggest soccer arena than anywhere in the country for soccer only. And it took up everything. And they're still saying today they want to stop the fairgrounds racing. That's been around since what, the 50s? And they want to stop racing and build other things on the racetrack. And of course, before that was the Coliseum. That burned down. Loretta Lynn had a rodeo show in there, and my dad would have wrestling on Wednesday nights. And it was such a terrible thing. The Coliseum, oh God, it's sad, really. The Coliseum on a Tuesday night exploded. The heat system exploded, and the building went up in flames. If it was the same time, 24 hours later, it had been 500 to 1,000 people in there for wrestling, and all of us in there. And it was so ironic to think that 24 hours before we had our wrestling match, that the place exploded, and nobody was in there. It was empty. But that place held 5,000, 6,000 people. Yeah. But the Coliseum was nice, wasn't air conditioned. And you talk about being hot in the summer, inside and no windows, and the sun was coming
and people smoking
like
and people smoking cigarettes back.
That's another thing. You're right. It probably been about 110 degrees in there. Then in the winter, they had some heat, but still was cold. But it would draw every week, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, no problem. But to hear that on a Wednesday morning, but the Coliseum, and our ring was in there. We had seats in there. Everything in there was gone because it happened 24 hours before, but nobody was in there. So God's willing, I'm glad it happened then and not on a Wednesday.
Georgia, there's so many unique buildings throughout our history of our business here, but also unique talent. When you were young growing up, and the likes of the Smoking Monroe, the Fargos, the Daltons, and the Ike Eakins, and all those unique characters passing through, did you ever befriend any of those guys? Or did they become like mentors to you? Or tell us a little bit about some of your memories of those guys like that.
I guess my closest and best friend was Corsica Gene. There was the Corsica brothers, Joe and Gene. Right. Yeah. And I took a liking to Gene. And of course, back then we lived in East Nashville, and be 9, 10 o'clock at night, he'd come over his wife, his wife would talk to my wife, my dad's wife, and we'd go out in the street and start passing footballs or throwing baseballs. And back then there was no traffic. So we could go out there in 2 or 3 hours and do the same thing. And we done that almost every Sunday. And then the Matador was another one that came over and done things like that. Even Lynn Rossi came over. Danny Dusick was the one that built rings for my dad. And of course, I showed you that ring, that miniature ring that I sent pictures of that was built in the mid-50s for me. But he made a 3-foot ring out of actual ring parts for me. And
that's amazing. That picture, that photo was amazing.
Right. And that's not the rings they sell now made out of plastic. This was a ring that was made out of steel supports. He used the mat from a real mat. He had the wood from plywood from a real ring and a little post made out of metal, steel. And Danny would come over and would pass football. So it was 4 or 5 I was really close to, But I guess Corsica Gene was the most I was close to the most, and would eat something in the house and then go out there. And like you said, you don't see that anymore.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and speaking of talent, Tojo Yamamoto, who became a mentor of yours, how did your friendship develop with Tojo?
Tojo and I were almost like two peas in a pod. We worked together. He took me under him and taught me a lot. Matter of fact, we opened up a Gulas and Tojo's Oriental and Greek restaurant on Donaldson Pike for a while.
Oriental
and would have Greek food and Oriental food. And Tojo probably was one of the best cooks you'd ever see. He fixed the best egg rolls and the best fried rice. And pepper steak would go out and people would come. They'd drive 15 miles just to get the pepper steak. And then on Wednesdays and Fridays, we'd have Greek food. And we had some Greek woman that cooked for our church. They would fix the Greek food to come over and prepare that on Wednesday and Friday. So everybody knew Wednesday and Friday was Greek food. The rest of the days, Oriental food. And we had a small little ring set up in the window, maybe about 6-7 foot square, that had ropes. We had chairs in there for table. And we'd always say, if you want to go into a wrestling ring to eat, come on in there. It's waiting for you. But Tojo and I were very close. And like I said, to know what he'd done, it was a shame. And I'm going to tell you, I need to break this. Years after Tojo committed suicide, another wrestler I thought was one of the toughest was Gypsy Joe. And Gypsy Joe told me one day, he says, George, when your dad died in 1991, Tojo committed suicide in 1992. And the thing was, Tojo told Gypsy, with Nick gone, there's nobody to take care of me because he had diabetes. He couldn't wrestle anymore. And I think that's what really brought Tojo down. My dad died. And I wish I could have found Tojo because I would have helped Tojo. Tojo helped me so much. We traveled up and down those highways. We went everywhere from Jackson, Tennessee, to Huntsville, to Chattanooga, to Clarksville, to Tupelo. We traveled together. And Tojo was not the kind of guy to carry people in that car. Jared rode with him for a while till they wasn't partners anymore, and Tommy Rich. But other than Rich and Jared and me, I don't think anybody else rode in Tojo's car because Tojo was very peculiar. Tojo would change his phone number every 6 months, so nobody would know who his phone number was. But he was a distant person, but if he liked you, he would go to bat for you, and he would do anything in the world for you. And what he done for me, I'll never forget. And God rest his soul, it's been, 1992, how many years ago? And it was so bad because the day he committed suicide, they went in, he had everything packed up, all the furniture, everything, and he left a note. He said, I'm not going to be with you anymore. He said, I'm making this easy. I've packed everything up for y'all. And when they walked in, it was, and then they found him.
I think that's something that gets lost is the relationship that your dad and Tojo had, because Jerry Jarrett and Tojo were so much pushed on television as having this close, tight relationship, and they did. But when your dad and Jerry Jarrett split in the business, Tojo and Jackie Fargo stayed with your dad.
Yeah, it's really funny because Tojo and even Jackie told me, he says, your dad brought me in with Don Fargo and Tojo, and we will be with Nick to the day he either passes on or he retires. We're not going to turn down somebody that we've been with him since the 50s. And you have to admire that. If Lynn Rossi was alive, he probably would have been the same way. But see, Lynn passed on, and he got into the vitamin health food business and didn't stay around wrestling long after he stopped wrestling. And of course, Joey died. But Lynn got out of it because he went to that vitamin business. But Lynn had been another one because my dad brought Lynn in back in those days. But Tojo and Jackie stayed with him, and I admire him for that. And we had that big memorial match in 2011 for my dad at the fair, at the arena on Trinity Lane. Mike Porter had a building there he ran every Thursday night. And we turned people away. Channel 4 actually put that on. And they'd come out there and they did their remote from there that night. And Jackie came as a special guest, and he did the strut in the ring. Of course, he had the white gray hair, and it's on YouTube now. And it was the old school wrestling, Gulas old school wrestling. And you can look it up on YouTube, and it'll show it. Jerry Law was on the card, Bill Dundee was on the card, Brian Christopher was on the card. We had a total of 15 wrestlers, and 12 were legends. And people came from all over that night, and we drew close to 1,500 people in the building, held about 1,000. They were standing everywhere.
I'm glad you brought up the partnership in the restaurant with Tojo, because one of the things I was going to ask you is about your family's history in the restaurant business. Doesn't your family have a lot of experience with Greek restaurants?
All my dad's people in the restaurant business. They asked him, why don't you come in? Why are you going to be the black sheep and go into wrestling? My dad said, that's what I want to do. Because they forced my dad to go in the wrestling business. And my dad's youngest brother had a club. It was actually a strip club.
Was that
and
Gus?
It was, in the front was a restaurant, in the back was a strip club.
Was that
and
Gus?
After the wrestling on Monday night, we'd go to the club, and my dad would be with his brother. My dad's brother would announce the first 2 matches at the auditorium, and then go to open up the club. And then we'd go see them before we'd leave for Nashville. So instead of leaving at 11 o'clock when the wrestling was over, we'd leave at 12 or 12:30 because my dad wanted to spend time with his brother.
Was that
they're always in the restaurant, some type of restaurant business, but my dad wasn't.
George, was that your Uncle Gus?
No, the one that had the club was Alec.
Oh, Alec. Okay.
Gus had the one way before then. It was a supper club. And the rest, well, my dad's sister had a washateria and had a kind of a small restaurant up front. So everybody had restaurants or supper clubs. And of course, Alec had the strip club and the restaurant up front. But my dad never wanted to go in a restaurant. He wanted to stay in wrestling. And they asked him, years after years, Nick, you got to come here and go into the restaurant business. Even open up one in Nashville. He said, no, I don't want to do it. I want wrestling.
Now, he did get your Uncle Gus in the wrestling business too, right? Did he have a town or two that he ran?
Gus, helped Gus. He lived in Huntsville. And his son Teddy and them would come and they would sell tickets for my dad in Huntsville. Teddy would. And Gus would come around like a co-promoter. And I say, 20 years that occurred with Teddy and Gus. Of course, Teddy is my age now. And all my dad's brothers and sisters had girls and boys, and we're all about the same age. And Huntsville, one of the best drawing towns for that size for years. We ran at the Coliseum. And I'm going to tell you, that had no air conditioning. And if you went in that building, there was nothing there except a closed building and no doors or anything. It got up at least to 90, 100 degrees. You would walk from the dressing room in the back, which would be about a 100-foot walk down a walkway, until you got to the ring, you would bust it out in sweat with your jacket on.
Jerry, that sounds like Tallahassee.
That's what I heard. And they came. You may draw, it held maybe 1,000 people. It'd be close to that every week. In the summer, people didn't care. And of course, they did the smoking too, like Gary said, and like Jerry Brisco said, it got hotter. But nobody left. They came. And in the winter, it was kind of cold in there, but not like the summer. When summer hit, but it never hurt the crowd. And we thought, with summer here, we're going to be dead in there. No.
George, Tony brought up the split. Were you active in the wrestling business when the split came, and what is your memories of the split with Nashville? And
yeah, I guess I was. And I think about it now, and a lot of people told me, George, you may not have been the best wrestler, but you tried. And being Nick's son, he's going to push you. And then Jerry pushed Jeff, his son. Vern Gagne pushed Greg, his son. I mean, who's going to turn down your
And
son?
Eddie Graham pushed his son, Mike Graham.
Exactly right.
And the
And the
Von
Von
Erichs
Erich,
pushed the Von
yeah,
Erichs, and the
Fritz Von
Funk
Erich
pushed
with
the
the Von
Funks.
Erichs. And of
I
course,
mean, every wrestling territory was a family business.
Yeah.
right. And they're going to protect their son. And of course, I may not have been the best. I tried. And some things said were not that bad. And some things were actually made up because I never said those things, or my dad never said those things. But I
Like
want
my
to tell you
daddy,
something.
like we'll get right to the my daddy said you got to sell and all that
No,
stuff.
I never heard that. I don't know where that came from.
Yeah.
And I'll take a oath on my mother's grave, my dad. I never said that. He never said that. You know,
Where did that come from, George?
I don't know where it came. Well, I'm not gonna mention any names. It came from one who does a lot of podcasts.
Yeah.
I think you know who. And this was JC.
but
But like I said, and I'm sure it was a lot of jealousy too, and being Greek, and my dad being a promoter and trying to push me. But I want to tell you one story that nobody knows, and I think it would clear a lot of things up. Y'all have never heard of this. A year before Jarrett died, I'm refereeing a basketball game in Hendersonville at one of the local high schools. And it was a boys' game. I was only going to do the first game, not the second game. And I look up in the stands, and in the stands was Jerry, his wife, and two or three other individuals. And I'm saying, what is he here for? So my game was finished. I changed, put my clothes back on. I'm walking out. Jerry says, George, how you been? And I was shocked. And I said, Jerry, what are you here for? He said, my grandson's playing. And you refereed his game just now. He said, let's sit down for a little bit. We sat down for 25 minutes and started talking. And we talked about everything under the moon. And he says, you know, George, we have no family here. Your mother and dad's gone. My mother and dad's gone. And I know we've had some bitter disappointments and bitter things said in the past. I said, I know, Jerry. And I said, this is a different era now. And I'm not upset what was said. And I said, let's do this. If I'm willing, you're willing, let's forget bygones be bygones. Let's forget about the past and let's forgive and forget. And Jerry looked at me and says, I agree. Let's forget that. And his wife came down and said, Jerry, let's go. Your granddaughter's playing across town in another gym. And he says, Deborah, I'll be there in just a minute. And we looked at each other. He said, I wish this was done years ago about us forgiving. And I said, and it was sad. Jerry said, I've got to go. My wife driving me crazy. I said, Jerry, I love you. Jerry said, George, I love you too. And we hugged, and a year later he passed on. But I know he went to his grave knowing that we forgave and forgot. And the good Lord wants you to do that with everybody. And I'll feel the same way when I go. And if we meet again, I know we've made up for everything we've done. And that was a night I'll never forget. And it's been several years now since Jerry's been gone. He died on Valentine's Day. But to hear us say to each other, it would keep people's mouths shut now that said that Jerry hated my dad, hated me. Sure, they didn't get along and the breakup happened. But we forgive and we forgot what happened. And that was something that really hit me strongly, and him too. We told each other we loved each other.
Did you have any type of friendship with Jeff?
Yeah. I mean, Jeff's daughters played basketball, and I refereed quite a bit of their games.
Wow.
And I'd be getting ready to start the game, and next thing you know, somebody tapped me on the shoulder. Hey, you're going to call it a good game for my daughter, aren't you? He always came up to me. We respected one another. His daughters were great basketball players. One was super great. But I'm going to tell you, Jeff never said a bad thing about me doing all that. Nothing, not a bad thing. Everything was kept with him because I knew Jeff. I refereed Jeff when he played high school ball. He played at Aquinas college basketball, junior college. And Jeff and I were close. And I want to tell you something happened. It was funny since you mentioned Jeff. There was some local wrestling here a couple of years ago that it was promoted by Jason James, Pro Entertainment Wrestling, and wrestlers would come and set tables up and selling merchandise. And one night, Jeff had his set up, and next to him was my table set up. And my wife, Julie, was selling my merchandise. And of course, Jeff always loved my wife, and my wife loved Jeff and his wife now. And some guy comes up and says, Jeff, boy, what about your dad and God and Nick? They would eat each other's throats for years. Can you believe that? That must have been something terrible. And Jeff says, sir, I need to tell you something. See that woman next to me? Yeah. Well, you know what? That's George Gulas' wife, Julie. Now, is something wrong with your equation? We're here getting along, talking, laughing, cutting up. Your comments about my dad and his dad, I don't think it's adding up to anything. And the guy said, oh, I guess you're right. And he bought something from Jeff and bought something from my table and walked off. And like Jeff told him, there's no hard feeling. There was no hard feeling then a couple of years ago. We got along. It's just that particular time of the years that wrestling was going on, we had to break up. Jerry Lawler, he came at his table several times the past couple of years and set up next to mine. We talked and laughed about ball games, and he loved the Cleveland Indians, the Cleveland Browns, because I'm a Houston Astro fan and a Seattle Seahawk fan. We talked and cut up. And of course, he said things about me, and we kind of made up and said, he kind of said one day, I'm sorry for what I said. I said, I'm sorry what I said about you too. And that was all forgotten. So people today, they don't realize what we've done in the past few years. We've made up for all that. And it's going to go on, I guess, till we pass on. They hate each other. No, I made up with Jerry Jarrett, Jerry Lawler and I. We talked and cut up. We went to the wrestling and had those tables set up. No problem at all. And Bill Dundee was another one. Never said one bad word about me at all. And to this day, when I see him at the arenas, when he comes and he has somebody driving, we sit and talk about the past. But as far as Dundee and Jeff Jarrett, nothing was said bad about me. And I commend them for that. And I respect them wholeheartedly. And like I said, I just wish people know, well, whoever listens to this, I hope these people tell those people about Jerry Jarrett and my story the year before he died, because it really felt good with me what we done that night. And to say we loved one another and what was done and said years before that, who ever thought that would happen?
Well, I'm glad you...
what a great story, man. We really appreciate you telling those stories to us here. And but it's great. It's a great feeling, George, that you got to have that. You know, you made amends and other people's made amends to you. And you know, the stories get going. They get out of proportion time. And especially in the wrestling business, by the time they reach a person, this guy said this. So I'm so glad you were able to sit down one-on-one with these guys and clear the air there. It's got to make you feel great.
And I want to tell you one other story. You know, you talk about, and Tony probably can vouch for this. Saturday was a big day for wrestling. And we had TVs everywhere and house shows. So a typical Saturday, and I want to tell you this story, it won't take long, would start off on Saturday morning with wrestling at the TV station in Nashville. And we'd finish around noon, 12:30. We'd hop in the car, we'd drive to Chattanooga, 120 miles away, and their TV would start at 5 o'clock, which is Eastern time. We was on Central time. And we'd have TV wrestling there. We'd do our work on TV. 5 to 6, it'd be over. Then we hop in the car, we'd drive 3 or 4 miles to the downtown auditorium and would have the house show in Chattanooga. And of course, we'd start at 8 o'clock. That'd be 7 Central time. If you worked the first or second match at the auditorium, several of us will put our sweatsuits on, we have our boots on, we jump in the car, and with that, we drive to Birmingham, 150 miles away, 155 miles away. You get to Birmingham, when you get there, they had TV from 10:30 to midnight. We'd get there just in time for the matches on TV, and we'd wrestle on a TV show in Birmingham. Then we'd hop in the car about 12:30, 1 o'clock, and drive back to Nashville. Now, 36 hours later, Monday afternoon, we get in the car and drive back to Birmingham for the house show. So with the Saturday and the Monday mileage, it came around 800 miles a week. Now, sometimes we'd stay in Birmingham Saturday night and Sunday to be there for Monday. But the majority of the guys, including myself or Tojo or whoever, we'd just drive back to Nashville. But my dad would say, boy, that is silly to drive back to Nashville and stay 36 hours and turn around and drive back to Birmingham. So we'd wrestle 4 times on a Saturday. And that was just one episode, or we would do maybe twice a month doing that. And that's a lot to do in one day. Nashville, Chattanooga. And luckily, Chattanooga's TV was 5 to 6. So if something wasn't going good in ticket sales, they knew what to say and do on TV. And then you go to the auditorium at night, and the triple ticket sales jumped even higher than that. Because my dad would always call and say how the tickets are going. And they'd say, and they had like 8 rows of ringside all the way around. And they'd say, 3rd or 4th row. And then when TV was over, and he'd call, and they'd say, Nick, we're in the 7th row now. What the hell happened? And he said, no, we just had TV. And of course, those people selling tickets couldn't believe how all of a sudden, within an hour, the place was loaded with fans coming in because they saw TV, and what they saw on TV they liked. They came to the auditorium. So that was convenient to have TV from 5 to 6, and the auditorium was 3 or 4 miles away, and that match started at 8.
That's another guy that I wanted to bring up to you. You brought up Birmingham television. I mean, we used to see clips of Birmingham on the Nashville show when I was growing up, and Sterling Brewer was
Sterling Brewer.
And Sterling Brewer, in my estimation, is one. He should be remembered as a top 5 great announcer in wrestling history.
Tony didn't get pushed like the rest of them, and compared to bigger cities and bigger markets, you're right. And another one that was good was Harry Thornton on Tennessee, on Chattanooga, and then Grady Reeves in Huntsville done a good job. And like you said, those are like in the background because they wasn't pushed. And Sterling and Harry and Grady, I think, was 3 of the best.
They were
and
awesome.
I think you'd go with me. And even fans today remember Harry and remember Sterling. And Sterling brought the TV 10:30 midnight every Saturday, Channel 42, and we'd get there about 10:20 because a 150-mile drive wasn't that bad, but it wasn't that easy to get out of Chattanooga and try to drive to Birmingham and get there before TV started.
There's a couple of guys I wanted to specifically ask you about. They're both passed on now. They're considered to be like one of the best tag teams ever in wrestling history. One of them you were tagged up with. You were called the Jet Set. You and Bobby Eaton. Your dad got Bobby Eaton started in the business, and so what were your memories of Bobby Eaton?
Bobby and I were like brothers. I mean, we traveled together. We stayed together. We had trunks that matched. We had even jumpsuits that wore in the ring that said Jet Set. And of course, when I saw Bobby a couple of years before he died, he told people, somebody said, y'all the Jet Set. And Bobby and I said, no, that was young, fast, and single. We're not that anymore. But Bobby was a great wrestler. And, Bobby helped me a lot. And of course, people would say, well, Bobby suffered because of me. And Bobby always told me to say, no, if anybody done anything to George, I would kick their butts because George is like a brother to me. And we've been together for several years. And I'm never going to let George go down or get upset or get hurt by anybody because I'll take up for George. And he lived in Huntsville and he started in Huntsville.
Right.
And Bobby and I were very close. And I guess you could say Bobby and Tojo were the very closest to me. Then, of course, I teamed up with Jackie.
Yeah.
And I was close to Jackie. But I guess Bobby was the one that was the most meant to everybody. And, of course, Tojo was right behind. That Bobby meant so much to each other because we were the Jet Set. And it stayed that way for years. even after Bobby went on to higher levels, he always remembered the jet set. And he even took a picture I saw one day. He had a jet set trunks on when he was the Midnight Express. So God rest his soul, Bobby. And just think about, the shirt I've got on now. I don't know if I could show you. It's Eddie Litton assigns umpires from my games to umpire. He made this shirt. And
It's the
I'm on it.
four biggest
Jojo's
baby
on it,
faces in the Tennessee
Jarretts
territory.
on it, and Jackie Fargo's on it.
Yeah.
And that picture sold, I can't tell you how much, because 3 of the 4 are gone now. And he gave me that shirt the other day. And I told him I'm going to wear it. And then even Jerry Brisco said, you need to wear that because it corresponds to what we're doing. But I'm proud of that shirt. And there's pictures like that was sold for years. But that shirt was given to me, and I'll always keep it. And I'll never forget these 3. And
those are the 4 biggest baby faces in the Tennessee territory in the 70s.
You're right.
Well, the other guy, we've been talking a lot about Dennis Condrey because we just lost him. And we've been talking about the 3-man Midnight Express team, and which that brings up the Freebirds. You actually were on the first 3-man team I remember, though, because you, Jackie Fargo, and Dennis Hall were the NWA 6-man tag team champions.
Right. And, it's really funny because everybody said, that's not going to be any good. It took off, and it done well. And we had 6-man tag team title belts. And, and of course, Dennis Condrey, he teamed up with Phil Hickerson a lot in this area.
Yep. I was going to ask you about your memories of Dennis.
Right. And we challenged them a lot in those 6-man tag matches. And Dennis was a heck of a worker, one of the best. And when I got in the ring with him, you learn more from him than you would from 5 or 6 others. And Phil Hickerson, he lives in Jackson still today. He's got his own radio show. But Dennis was a great worker. And you'd be surprised how many wrestlers have come through here and gone on to bigger and better heights, or who my dad started. And that was one good thing that, you could think about that there was a lot, and you were back in those days, but how many that came through here and made a name for themselves when they went on, or made a name for themselves here and stayed here.
And stayed there. Yeah. I'm doing a feature here in a couple of days on Bearcat Brown, who was a huge baby face in the Tennessee territory.
And you mentioned that about the Bearcat Lynn Rossi thing. And it was funny because Saul Weingroff was a joker. He loved to say jokes and all. So when Birmingham had that deal with with Lynn and Bearcat, and Saul was involved and the Germans was involved.
You're talking about when you're trying to break the racial barrier, right, in Birmingham.
Saul comes out on the stage one day, and the place was packed. It just got over well. And Saul told my dad, I'm sitting right there. I'm probably shocked what he said. He says, Nick, I'm going to tell you something. Look out there and all these people. When we have this match tonight, I want you to think of something. I'm a Jew. You're a Greek. My partner's a German. Lynn's Italian. Bearcat's black. We're the only one in the ring that's white's the referee. We may get bombed in here tonight. And of course we didn't. But the way he said it, because he's right. The only one was Bob Holland, the referee. He was the only one with no ethnic background.
Wow.
But you were right. That really started something in Birmingham that just exploded something bigger and better.
George, that's such an interesting subject there. Did you remember any of those racial days like that? I mean, we all have our memories. I was tag teaming with Thunderbolt Patterson. We'll go into some of these towns at big sign, welcome to KKK territory. Then when Bearcat Brown and these guys were coming along, along with Sputnik, were there other guys that were very active in trying to solve the problems there?
Probably, but I think Bearcat was the number one with that. I think he got over so well with the public. They loved him as a wrestler and a person. And I think that's what helped Bearcat. He started something, but everybody else followed. We had Rufus R. Jones come in. I was partners with him. We had Pistol Pez Watley that was here. Of course, him and George Weingroff was probably the two best wrestlers, amateur. They went to UTC in Chattanooga and did wonderful. George Weingroff, he was blind back then. Saul's son, I think he's taking that thing now. He can see, but George was tough. And George and I were very close. We traveled together. Saul, my dad, traveled together. We rode in the back seat and went everywhere. But Bearcat, I think, was the start of something that everybody else followed. And, you know, with Saul saying that, he was right. We could have been bombed there. And the tension and the heat with Governor Wallace and what happened in Alabama and Birmingham, I guess the good Lord was on our side because you knew, like they said, the KKK was outside the auditorium, but it didn't stop the fans from coming in. The place, 4 or 5 weeks, was sold out. They were lined up 2.5 hours for the match at the front of the auditorium, all the way down the back, which was probably a block. They were lined up. So they started something, but everybody else followed. And what an idea. But for Saul to say that, that's been on my mind and stayed on my mind forever because that is kind of funny. The referee is the only one.
Hey, George, you mentioned the Klan was there. Were they in full regalia when they're hoods and everything?
Yeah, a few of them were.
Wow.
And
really?
It was scary because what are they going to do? My dad's partner there, Ray Isley, who was also the commissioner there, he said, Nick, I know what we're going to do. I mean, they're out there. And my dad said, hell, let's go on with it. Who cares? My dad was that way. He didn't care. He said, we're not going to turn these people away for what they're trying to do. They may scare us what they're going to do, but if they do, so be it. But they never did anything. They didn't do a thing, but it was scary to see them there because they could have done something.
Yeah.
And fans coming in, they may wait to the opportune time. Let's do it now. But they didn't. And I guess they probably think we were going to do it ourselves to go with it. But I guess we told him, no, we're going to go with it. And my dad was that hard-headed, and he went with it. And like Tony said, it really opened up something that nobody ever thought, especially Alabama and Birmingham, of all places. Anywhere else, Nashville, Chattanooga, Memphis, Louisville, Huntsville, but Birmingham, that was the hotbed of what was happening in there. Right. But of course, Saul saying that kind of teased everybody, and everybody kind of laughed about that because he was right.
What was the Klan there just to intimidate people? Did they do anything or just
no? I think intimidate, and I think they probably figure, well, if we're here, we'll probably scare people away. But those people, I don't know, they had the guts to come in because they wanted to be there to see the match. They didn't care what they were saying. They may have made some comments, but few of them come. My dad said, you know, you have some company outside, but it's not going to keep us from coming in. And they came on in. And it was like a week or two, but then he come back. I think they realized that we're going to go with it, go forward with it. So no use coming back. They're going to do it because they want to do it.
Yeah. George, what were the best years of the territory as a whole? What were the hottest years that you guys had?
I'm going to think probably, the 70s and 80s. 70s that really caught fire. And I think the 80s, and especially with Jackie and Tojo and Lynn Ross, all them, and Bearcat, that really started in the 70s. And I think it carried on in the 80s. And we had a lot of wrestlers come in that today people remember. They started in Nashville. They started in Memphis. They started in Birmingham. They're wrestling today. Some retired, they remember. They started back then. I'm going to say the 60s were big, but like Tony said, there wasn't a lot of publicity back then. The Hippodrome started a lot of wrestlers. But I think the fairgrounds and I think the Hippodrome started and built from there. I'm going to say the 70s and 80s.
Well, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I quoted them on our series that we did. But you guys had better ratings than SEC Sports.
Yep, sure did.
It was huge. It was huge.
Yep, sure did. And it was really funny because Channel 8, which is now Channel 2, they didn't want wrestling. Louis Drone, the manager, said, Nick, I don't think it's going to go over. And he said, Louis, please let me try it. And then it started for an hour, and it went for an hour and a half. And Louis said, man, this is the best thing that ever happened. Nick said, well, hell, you told me it's not going to be any good. He said, I was wrong. We're going to keep going with this. And like I said, the wrestling back in at Channel 8, the road was about 20 feet, 25 feet wide. Only one car could go up at one time. And there was a person downstairs for walkie-talkie, a person at the top of a walkie-talkie, and they'd say, okay, like Tony, car coming up, and the one upstairs would say, okay, nobody can come down. And that's how the people would go up. It maybe held about 40 cars up there, but you couldn't drive because it was only enough for one car. And the funny part was that one time I told you it snowed that day, and you couldn't get up to the top of the hill. And only a few people came up there, and Tojo's car wouldn't go up the hill. So poor Tojo parked it down, and it was probably about a quarter of a mile to get to the top. And it was cold, and snow was on the ground and ice. And Tojo's trying to walk up there with his clogs or barefoot, and he got frostbite because he was walking up, and he couldn't drive up, and his toes were frozen. And that's how bad Tojo wanted to get it. He said, I'm not missing this, Mr. Nick. I'm coming up there. He said, hell, if my feet freeze, they freeze, but I'm not missing this TV. And of course,
I hope he didn't have on his little wood. I hope he didn't have on his little open-toe wooden clogs.
He did.
Wow.
He did. He had them in his hand.
Dress, Japanese
he had
dress.
left was flip-flops, and he put those on. And he said, man, Mr. Nick, my feet are frozen. You know, and Tojo, he was comical at times. He really was. But that's what really started wrestling in Nashville was Channel 8, WSIX. And of course, my dad moved on from there. He went to Channel 2 on Murfreesboro Road. He went to Channel 5 to have wrestling. And then Channel 17 had wrestling. So all the TV stations, with the exception of Channel 4, had my dad's wrestling one time or the other. And Channel 5 was downtown, had wrestling there. Channel 17 was on Charlotte Avenue, which going towards 40. And of course, Channel 2 was on Murfreesboro Road. The first one was on top of the hill at Channel 8 in Brentwood.
When you were a kid growing up, George, and your dad and Roy were in the process of building this whole big territory, did you see him very much? I mean, was
No.
he wasn't home a lot, right?
Not a lot. It's just my mother and me. And you'd see him, see Birmingham Monday. You'd see him on Tuesday. He didn't go to Johnson City. Danny Dusick went there to check up for him and come back. Nashville was Wednesday. Thursday, sometimes he went to Bowling Green. Of course, I went to Bowling Green. He went to Huntsville a couple of times a month on Friday. And of course, I was there every Friday. And then he went to Chattanooga every week. Chattanooga and Nashville was his baby, and Birmingham. But Chattanooga, I guess, was the best because we mentioned TV was at 5, the house show was at 8. And then on Thursdays, they used to run, but they stopped because he figured if you have TV on Saturday, that's a long time to Thursday. And whatever you done on TV to bring the crowd in. So let's change it. Let's have wrestling on Saturday after TV. And that was a smart thing because you can think of it too. And JBL and him, you have something you do on TV on Saturday. 5 days later, they may forget that. Or what they do last week, I don't know if we ought to go tonight or not. But if you do something on TV at 5 o'clock and you got the house match at 8, they're going to come.
Right.
And of course, every Thursday ran for years except one Thursday out of the year after they went to Saturday, it was Thanksgiving. He ran Thanksgiving night and came back on Saturday because he had the TV before the house on Saturday. So he ran Chattanooga twice in 3 days because TV was on that Saturday before that Saturday night.
Now, was wrestling the only promotion that your dad did, or did he do any country shows or any outside
He used
shows?
to book like Woody Herman, all those people back in the 40s and 50s. He used to book those kind of music, the old time music, the jazz and all that. He used to book that in Nashville. I didn't know that for a while. I know he didn't even book those singers. And he done a lot of those back in the day, and he had. I thought maybe he was gonna just do that, but I guess he done that as a side thing. But wrestling was his thing. But he did book singers back in the day, the 40s and 50s, and he had some music responsibilities here in Nashville, but it didn't stay with him long. I don't know if he didn't like it, but he had a lot of those singers that's passed on now, but that's very popular back in the 40s and 50s. And everyone you see back then or hear music, my dad had something to do with him because he brought him into Nashville.
Probably
you mentioned your booking book. Is there much memorabilia that you have from your dad's promotional days, any wall posters or anything like that?
Book what?
Memorabilia. Do you have any memorabilia from your dad's promotional days?
I've got it loaded here. I mean, memorabilia was something. I've got scrapbooks my mother made. I've got window cards. I've got all kind of pictures. I kept my 2 or 3 of my jackets. I kept the Jet Set jacket. My dad was a big thing on satin jackets. On the back, he'd have Gulas Pro Wrestling. And of course, when I opened up Gulas Old School Wrestling, we had jackets made like that. And it have our name on the front, and on the back, it'd say Pro Wrestling, and have like Gulas, and then it's come down in a curl and have Pro Wrestling underneath. And all kind of memorabilia. I was just forced to have all of it and still do. And to look back and see things in the 70s and 80s, it brings back a lot of memories.
George, I'm not kidding.
Speaking of memories, what is your favorite memory of your wrestling days?
Well, when an arena would sell out and would be part of.
Yeah.
No, I guess the best memory was I did try and I did my best to be a pro wrestler. And like I said, I was told by a lot, well,
Did you really want to be a pro wrestler at that time, or were you wanting to be a businessman, or you wanted to be another sport?
Well, I should have stuck, I should have stayed with the announcing or the commentating, but no, I took a hand in and tried. And Gorgeous George Jr. back in and Tojo, and even Dennis Hall was the one that kind of broke me in. And well, maybe I should have, but to hear comments made, it's old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names never hurt me. And the biggest thing, I know a lot of things were said bad about me, but the old saying is if somebody's saying bad about you, somebody else is being rested and not being said about them, because it never stops. It goes
George, we all have. Well, we all have it. I mean, I was coming on air. I was in the ring with Dory Funk, and Terry Funk, and Jack Brisco, and you always see, well, Jerry was the weak link there. Screw you. You don't know what I was. And JBL, I mean, sure, we all get that kind of crap.
I got a list of detractors an arm long, George.
You got a scrapbook. You got a scrapbook.
And the only thing wrong with Mr. Brisco is he's from Oklahoma. Now that's a major flaw. But other than that, he's a really good man.
Well, like I said, and you're going to hear comments in anywhere. Even today in basketball, here's a brief example. Bruce Pearl, one of the best basketball coaches, coached Auburn, and he retired last year. And it was coaches galore wanted that job, and he pushed his son to get the job, and he got the job. Yeah. And then you hear people, well, Bruce Pearl got his son that job at Auburn because that's his son. Well, he's done a good job. He won the NIT tournament the other night. He's not going to be like his dad, maybe not for a while, never. But see, here we go again. Here's a father pushing his son. It's going to go on after we're dead and gone, people. It's going to go on because blood's thicker than water. And a father's going to push a son or a daughter to whatever. And maybe they never were.
And they ain't going to walk out on you, the bottom line. They ain't going to walk out on you.
And Jerry, that's one of the main points. That's one of the main points with fathers pushing their sons is they know they can trust their sons.
Yeah.
You push your son and that son becomes a star. That son is not going to leave you. That son is not going to stiff you and go to another promoter and stiff his own dad. So there's a reason that for you push your own family. It's for self-survival as much as it is nepotism. It's not necessarily about that. It's the right thing to do in many cases.
And I think too, jealousy comes out because they said, Well, we can't do that, but they can. So let's just run him down. Let's say he's bad or he's not good or whatever. And that's fine. Like I said, but then when I told that story about Jerry, if people hear this, ought to realize what happened. And it was pretty heated back then. It got very bad. Yeah. My dad would run Louisville. They would run Louisville. And my dad tried to run Memphis. They'd run Memphis. And of course, they had Jerry Law, and they got the TV there. That's fine and good. They had Lance Russell. That helped get that too. And there was some bitter feuds back then, things said. But then when it's all said and done, the good Lord said, George, you and Jerry, this is not right. Forgive one another. Whoever thought he would be in that gym the night I refereed that game? I would never thought in a million years I'd look up there and see Jerry. And there he was. And him to come down and break bread at first said, George, how in the hell you been? And it shocked me because I'm thinking, uh-oh, now look what happened in the past and what was said and what was done and how I was ridiculed or whatever. And to sit down and talk for 25 minutes and really go with things good, and then the bad came out, and to apologize and forgive one another, that I thought would never happen between us.
Nothing better.
Yeah, George. And like I said, to love and say I love you and I love you back, I hope people today that hear this kind of get a different idea of how we ended our relationship, because he went on and passed on. We're all going that route, but I know I can go too, knowing I forgave somebody that some things were bad and said those years. It was all forgotten that one night after that basketball game.
Hey, George, what was the relationship that your dad had with other promoters, especially like in the 80s when the wars started happening? But like, what was your dad's relationship, say, with Mr. Crockett, with Mr. Graham, with Vince McMahon, with Fritz, with Vern, and territories that were all surrounding, especially on the eastern part of the country?
My dad was very close to Vince McMahon. They were close. And he was very close with the Sheik in Detroit. And also Eddie Graham. They would exchange talent. They'd call and say, I got somebody come for 2 weeks. You have somebody come for 2 weeks. And they would exchange talent. And it was back then, everybody got along. And they exchanged talent. It was just not like, well, I'm not going there because I don't like it there. They may not like when they got here things that happened, but the majority of the time, they all were together. And of course, Crockett was close, being Charlotte. That was, and Jim Barnett and my dad were very close. And they would joke one another and whatever. And my dad got off everybody. Of course, we'd go to Las Vegas in the summer for the conventions, NWA conventions. And everybody would be there. Talk about exchanging talent and how to do things better. And back in the 80s, I remember I went a few times, and a comment was made. It says, people, our territory is not going to be much anymore. Once the satellites come out and the internet and the computers and all that, we're going to be buried. And it was right. The local wrestling that we had weekly is not anymore because it got to bigger and better things. And I think with the internet and with the satellite and all that and cable, it kind of hurt the local. And we talked about that 15, 20 years before it happened. And that's why promoters got along, because they all went to Vegas for 4 days, and that's all they talked about.
They had a common enemy out there, George, is what it was. They had a common enemy, which was TV.
And they'd go and see Elvis Presley concert or Dean Martin or whatever. They enjoyed themselves. I mean, it was great. And one story I didn't like, Elvis was there, and I'm sitting in the top balcony, and I look down below, and my dad's sitting there. He's on the front row. And then Elvis comes out, and the first thing Elvis done, he comes and says, Nick, it's good to see you. Wow. Elvis was a heck of a wrestling fan. He loved my dad. And I'm going to tell you a story that this is funny. Elvis went almost every week to Memphis wrestling, but nobody knew who he was. And what he done, he came in, he sat in the front row, he dressed up in overalls and jeans, a beard, and a cap. He looked like a farmer. And nobody knew it was Elvis. And he'd walk in the back and say, we said, why are you dressed that way? He said, how can I come see y'all, man? If I dress like I am and myself, I couldn't be able to come in the building. I'd be attacked. He said, that's why I want to come to see you guys. I love to watch y'all. So I'm going to come dressed up as a farmer. And nobody ever recognized him with the jeans, the overalls, the beard, and the cap. He looked like just a farmer. And that's why I said, you know, to see those people and to go to those conventions and then to see the promoters get together and rub elbows and talk, it was something to see. And a lot of people today, and I know Jared can remember back then, they all said, I'm looking forward to go to Vegas. And we'd win in June and we'd go for 3 or 4 days. Every year it was set in stone, we're going to Vegas. And some things were said good. Some things we tried to work things out to make better. It didn't work, but it was just good to get together and to be together because we weren't together during the year. But my dad was close to most all of them, even Mike LaBelle in California. You know, and like I said, it was Bill Watts. It was everybody. And everybody got together. It's a shame it's not that way now because most of them are, you know, passed on and gone to what I always say, they gone to the Golden Arena, 2 out of 3 falls, everlasting time limit. But like I said, I enjoyed it. And like I said, I know I had to face some of the critics, but I'm not going to take it away because I know I wasn't the best, but I sure wasn't the worst. And like I said, I've always called a better basketball player. At least I was good in something. I may have played in high school and college, and I tried it wrestling, and I really appreciate the ones that tried to help me. And like I said, Bobby, Eaton, and Tojo and Jackie, those are 3 that really tried to help me, and I commend them, and God rest their souls. They're in a better place now. Yeah. They're together again.
Well, George, thank you so much for joining us. It's such an honor to have you on. We've been wanting to talk to you for so long, and we talked about Roy Welch and Nick Gulas for 10 straight episodes, and we talked about your dad so much and about you. It's just such an honor to have you on, and such a big part of wrestling history that we're all a part of. So, thank you very much for taking the time.
Well, it was appreciative to be with you on this, Jerry, with your brother Jack. Fantastic wrestler, JBL, you too, and Tony, you know more about wrestling than probably 60% of some of the promoters today because you know everything. And it was an honor to be on this. I enjoyed this, to reminisce about stories and about things said that people now can realize, well, you know what? Things have got better because of Jerry and George and my dad about what I thought of myself being this bad or that bad or this good or not too good. I enjoyed being on it and hope we can do it again. It was an honor to meet you this way and hope one day we can all get together in person and break bread together and be somewhere because we're not going to be here forever. And let's enjoy one another while we're here because I think the world of all of y'all.
George, right. Are you open for signings and things like that, appearances and signings? And if so, where can the people reach out to you to kind of book you on some of these signings?
Well, that's a good question.
You have social media, Facebook, or that?
My wife does. She's an addict on that. I'm not, because I'm going to tell you one quick story. When you officiate basketball,
oh God!
Good God!
We
got it.
Yeah, you got it. Because you can say something bad before you know it, the world knows about that referee. But that'd be the only way because I'm not.
And how can they reach her to contact you for a signing?
Her name is Julie Gulas, Julie Gulas, and she has a Facebook. And there's a lot of wrestlers that it's really funny that are on her Facebook. You know, as you know, the Samoans that were here for many years, which is Roman Reigns' dad, his uncle, they wrestled for my dad. And my wife keeps contact for a lot of wrestlers. And The Rock, Rocky Johnson wrestled for my dad for years. And so Rocky and I were close friends. And The Rock went to high school in Nashville. So she's Facebooked to a lot of them, more I didn't even think of. So that's the way to reach her is Julie Gulas on Facebook. And she, Stan Lane and Steve Kern on her Facebook. So there's many on her Facebook, and they ask about how I'm doing. And she'll tell me, I'll tell them why you're not on it. And I can't, because I don't want to, being a referee, that's been my life. And really, referees and umpires shouldn't be on it, because you're going to hear something or read something, and before you know it, you got a war going.
We've talked about this right in the very beginning when I was trying to get you several months back, about refereeing and stuff like that. And being a high school referee and a non-pro referee, it's very difficult. You just got to put up with so many parents, coaches, and all this stuff. It takes a special person to give out. You're giving back to the kids, and I really, as a parent and as a coach, I really appreciate what you're doing for your community there by being a referee. So
it's really funny. Our head person at the state office always called fans certified idiots, because he said, we forgot more than they know. And the players sometimes, and it's really funny, quick story. We had COVID. No fans were allowed in the gym, just the teams, and maybe one filming the game and the scorekeepers and us. And there was many times, girls and boys games, that say, you know what, Mr. Gulas, basketball would be so much better for our parents, because you didn't hear the booing and, you suck, referee. Well, you didn't hear any of that. And the players enjoyed it better. And that's why when you referee today, you hear some things. And here in the state now, the past 2 years, if a spectator really gets on a referee, I mean hot and heavy, the AD or whoever's at the school will go over and they have to leave. But when they leave, it's a $500 fine.
Wow.
They got to pay to get back.
Good.
You send 2 people out, it's a $1,000 fine. And one of the parents said one time, it doesn't matter with me because the school's going to pay it. And the principal says, no, we're not. Your math cost it. You pay the $500. It really cut a lot of things down now. You're here, but not as much.
And answer this question. Who's worse, the wrestling fans or the basketball fans or the sport fans that you referee?
Basketball fans.
Thank you.
Because you're so close. Softball, you hear a lot. And I'm going to tell you a story about that real quick. I'm umpiring a softball game in one of the local colleges. Now I'm behind home plate. This was 2 years ago. I'll never forget it. And I'm behind home plate. In the first couple innings, this guy was on my butt from the start of the game to the second inning. That can't be a strike. That's a ball, man. That can't be a strike. About the second inning, the catcher turns around and said, Dad, why don't you shut your mouth? He's calling a good ball game, so shut it. The rest of the game, you didn't hear a word. On the back of her helmet, she had a little thing, I love umpires.
Oh.
And I said, well, you know why? With your smile, that's why you do love umpires. We like you too. But her dad was the one, and she said, you insult us to my school and my parents and my team the way you acted. So shut it. He didn't say a word the rest of the game. Matter of fact, when it's over, he said, I want to apologize for my actions. I said, it's okay, but I think your dad put you in your place. I said, your daughter really put you down. Yeah, I know, and I've done that quite a few times, but today was the worst. She really put me down. I said, well, you need to just tone it down, because what you see and what you assume is nowhere close to the strike zone. We got a shirt we wear. We're sitting in the crowd in the spectator part and said, I'm sitting with y'all and eating with you because you got a better view than me. So, and like I said, I enjoyed 46 years. What can you say, Yeah. And basketball is my best. I love to referee, and I like to umpire. Basically, because umpiring, you're out in the weather. It could be 65 today or 45 tomorrow. It could be raining and drizzling. Basketball, you're indoors. And basketball is my game because I played. But to stay young, you stay around those kind of kids. High school kids, even junior college. I did junior college women's basketball before I got older. If you stay around that age, you're going to stay young because they're young. You stay around somebody older, you're going to feel that way. And to get around girls and boys, 16, 17, 18 years old, You just stay that way. And maybe that's why in my age, it's my 47th year. If my hip becomes okay and my doctor says you'll be good to go, if you do it end of this month, you'll be good to go when basketball starts. And I've heard so many great comments that once you get this done, the day you do it, you're going to feel like a miracle's happened.
Well, here's the 50 year. Here's the next 3 years. You have 50 years, George. Good for you, man.
Do what?
I said, here's to 50 years. You know, here's another 3 years of doing it. So.
I've heard that through several, even referees. Can you go 3 more years? Well, I will because I want to, and I think this hip being fixed because, like he said, your right hip is 95% good. Your left hip, from 1 to 10, 10 being bad, it's close to 10. You have no cartilage. You're bone to bone. So I'm going to get it fixed. I'm going to go back to refereeing, and I'm going to do something I love because I'm not going to stop. I think this would be
for you.
Me to go 3 more years.
All right, Julie Gulas on Facebook. If you need George to make any appearance, any signings out there, he'd be brand new to this type of stuff. Fans are waiting to see him out there. Come on, promoters. Let's book George Gulas on some of these signings out there.
And all y'all have a blessed day and a blessed rest of the week.
Thank you.